Well, welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you for joining me. My name's Mark Littlewood. I'm the Director General here at the Institute of Economic Affairs. Thanks very much for joining us today for this IEA webinar to mark the launch of the IEA's latest research paper, Eastern Promise, Assessing the Future of UK-India Trade. Before I introduce both the author of that report and our other esteemed guests, let me get the boring housekeeping rules out of the way. We're broadcasting this simultaneously live on Zoom and on YouTube. If you're watching on the Zoom side of the call and you wish to put a question to our panelists, all of them or one specific panelist, please don't put your question in the chat box. Please use the Q&A function that you'll find at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Put your questions in there. Use the chat box for chat, but questions to go in there. If you're far too shy to ask a question yourself, but you have some opinion about which questions should be put, in that Q&A box, you can give a thumbs up to the questions that you want me to put. And being a very democratic kind of guy, I'm likely to put the questions that rise to the top of the pool with your votes. So that's how to put a question on the Zoom side. If you're watching us on the YouTube side and want to put a question, please put that in the chat and I'll try and use some of those as well. So that's the boring housekeeping out of the way. Let me introduce our guests for this important discussion on the future of UK-India trade. Dinesh Dameja is an entrepreneur and politician. He founded online travel agency eBookers. He was previously the Liberal Democrat member of the European Parliament for the London region, and he was head of the India desk for the European Parliament from 2019 to when Brexit happened. Welcome to you, Dinesh. Lovely to have you with us. Lord Saeed Kamal is the Acting Academic and Research Director here at the Institute of Economic Affairs and Professor of Politics and International Relations at St Mary's University, Twickenham, and a former member of the European Parliament himself. Imran Ahmad Khan is the Conservative MP for Wakefield and is chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Foreign Affairs. Good afternoon to you, Imran. Good to have you with us. And last, but by no means least at all, in fact, most important of all, Shankar Singham, who is the CEO of Trade Law and Economic Policy Consultancy Competere and an academic fellow here at the IEA, and is the author of the paper we are about to discuss. But let me tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to ask Shankar to give some opening remarks, talking us through what's in the paper. And then I'm going to ask each of our guests to give their introductory thoughts for just 3 or 4 minutes. And then I've got some questions of my own, but I'll be taking questions from the floor as well. So gentlemen, welcome, lovely to have you with us. Shankar, good to see you. Tell us, what have you discovered and recommended in this new IEA report of yours?
Well, first of all, thanks very much, Mark, for the introduction, and it's great to be able to present a paper at the Institute of Economic Affairs once more. So I'm going to, in a very short introduction, just make a couple of draw out a couple of key themes that come from the paper. But obviously, there's quite a lot in the paper, and we'd love to get into the Q&A on that. The key issue here, I think, is, and we start off with a quote in the paper from the Indian Foreign Minister about the alignment question. You know, India is no longer a non-aligned nation, he said in 2019. It's going to align now, but it's going to align on issues, and that sort of begs the question, you know, what are the issues on which it's going to align? India is very much at a crossroads. You know, the India sort of liberalization journey, if you will, sort of began in 1991 with the reforms of Manmohan Singh. It's been a bumpy journey. It's been very much a mixed record on this. But the situation now is very different from the 1990s. India is now geopolitically and geoeconomically surrounded, in a sense, by China. The ability to sort of go it alone is much less, and India is feeling, you know, under pressure because of the China issues, not only economic issues in terms of Chinese market distortions and state-owned enterprises and so on, but actually in a very real sense with respect to the naval bases that surround India and Pakistan and Sri Lanka, and the ringing of the Indian Ocean by Chinese concern. So there's a security issue here as well as a sort of geoeconomic issue, and into that, Boris Johnson was going to step. He's obviously not physically stepping into India because of the COVID restrictions, but he will be having a call with Prime Minister Modi. And there is a continued engagement between the UK and India, both in terms of an enhanced trade partnership, ultimately potentially leading to a free trade agreement. In the report, we very much focus on the fact that this is not to be regarded as a pure commercial deal. In fact, most trade agreements are not just pure commercial deals. Trade policy is part of your foreign policy. It does communicate other interests. And it is also not to be separated from the rest of the UK's trade policy. So the UK has a very specific trade policy involving what it can do with bilateral deals, the accession to the Comprehensive and Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership, and what it can do in the WTO. And the India relationship with the UK has implications in all of those areas. So it isn't just a UK-India deal, it's part of that whole CPTPP accession process. There are other countries acceding to the CPTPP at the moment, prominently Indonesia, Thailand, Taiwan, others, and of course the UK as well with its accession letter earlier on this year. And there is some discussion of potential for India also to accede into the CPTPP. This was raised in the Catherine Tai USTR hearings by Senator John Cornyn in the US, and clearly there is some interest there to do that. So I think the world is looking at India in terms of can India be aligned more into the sort of CPTPP group of nations, as it were. And it's important to point out with respect to the CPTPP, CPTPP plus the US, plus the UK, plus the accession countries, not including India, would already be the majority of the global economy. So it is a major platform. It is a major geostrategic play of the 21st century. And India is, I think, under a little bit of pressure to determine where it's going to align. Now, in all of that said, while there are great opportunities, I think, for the UK-India relationship, I think there are some challenges. And those challenges have been in the area of India's own market distortions. We did a paper earlier on with another group evaluating the potential productivity gains if some of those market distortions in the competition and trade space were actually reduced in India, and they are very significant. The potential for growth of the Indian economy is very significant if some of those gains can actually be made. And in that context, there's some good news and there's some bad news. The good news is there are some of the reforms that we suggested actually back in 2016, agricultural reforms, labor reforms. Some of those reforms are actually going into effect. Some of it, interestingly, being done at the state level. However, there are some negative issues that are coming up, particularly with respect to property rights protection, which is a fundamental issue. If you think about the alignment of those nations in the CPTPP context, for example, it's an alignment of nations broadly around open trade, competitive markets, and property rights protection. And it's in the property rights protection space that there are significant challenges. There have been a number of recent cases, and we mentioned them in the paper, Cairns, Vodafone, but perhaps the most egregious of all actually is the Davis case, where there has been a violation of a bilateral investment treaty arbitration ruling. There have been expropriations, and you see some of the things there that you wouldn't associate with a country that is trying to take a different sort of geopolitical, geoeconomic position. So there are some real questions about which India we're going to see here. And certainly when Prime Minister Modi took office, there was a question about whether Modi was going to be business friendly or market friendly. And those are two different things. If you're business friendly and the business that you're friendly with is the incumbent crony elite, that is very different from being market friendly. And the question there is, well, which is India going to be? And it's not clear at all, I think, at the moment, at the time of writing of the paper, which India we are actually going to see, and therefore I think the UK relationship with India is incredibly important. And you can see, and this is I think an important point we raise in the paper, you can see the opportunity for a deal. You can scope the deal between India and the UK much more clearly than, for example, the EU-India deal or the US-India deal. And that is because the UK has very, very focused offensive interests, particularly legal services, financial services, and of course the Scotch whisky tariff, which has been a major issue for the India-UK relationship for many, many decades. But those are the focused offensive interests of the UK. And defensively, what are India's offensive asks? Well, they're primarily in the areas of mode 4 services, movement of people. The Indian high-tech companies with subsidiaries in the UK, can they send their professionals to come and run those companies? A clue here is the UK-Japan FTA, where there were significant provisions on mode 4 services. That's likely to be the approach the UK will take, which is much more open, certainly in this government than, let's say, the Theresa May administration. But they're certainly much more open to mode 4 services. And the other big ask will be agricultural SPS issues, where you've got Indian rice and Indian tropical fruit banned by European SPS regime. The Europeans will find it very difficult to work with India, or indeed any country, on SPS rules, whereas the UK has an opportunity to change that. And certainly, if you look at the Trade and Agriculture Commission report, and I was a commissioner on the Trade and Agriculture Commission, we recommended the UK locking itself or rooting itself in the WTO SPS regime, which is, I certainly think, something that India would want. So you can see that a deal does exist out there, and the parties could achieve that. So the UK may be able to do something that no other trading partner can do. So I think there's tremendous opportunity, but significant challenges would be the takeaway from the
Thank you, Shankar. I'm going to come to Imran next for his opening remarks on what he sees as the opportunities and the challenges there. Just before I do, Shankar, I know analysts and economists hate this, especially the trade area, but can you give me a sense of size and scale? What sort of prize are we talking about, either for the UK or India? Right? What sort of boost in trade do you imagine, either through an enhanced partnership or further down the road a free trade deal? Just give me a sense of scale here.
Yeah, so there are sort of three answers to that. The first answer is commercially, and you've got goods traded about $15 billion US dollars in 2019, services around $18 billion. But the point is that they've been quite stagnant for quite some time, and there is a real opportunity to grow those numbers significantly. But it's really important not to lose sight of the bigger economic picture, which is if we can move countries like the UK, the US, the CPTPP countries, India, into this alignment around property rights protection, competition, and open trade, then the impact that will have on the global economy will be much, much larger than the uplift in trade figures solely between the UK and India. Yep. And that's the real prize that we're looking for. And of course, there is a big geostrategic prize of doing that as well, because if this also leads to a significant pressure on Chinese market distortions, and that causes China to rein in some of the practices in its state-owned sector, for example, that also will contribute significantly to economic gains around the world.
Shankar, thank you very much indeed. Let me come over to Imran. Imran, what do you make of it? Give us your quick overview in 3 or 4 minutes, just of what you think the opportunities and challenges are here, both economic but also geopolitical.
Thank you, Mark. Well, this Shankar gave a very, very full overview of the situation. And as he alluded to, trade deals with India have not proven the easiest of things for most countries. The EU-India negotiations have been going on, I think, since about 2007, with very little success so far. But I think because of a confluence of things, geopolitics, as you alluded to, Mark, and others, that there's a real possibility for these trade deals to work out and work out well for both parties. And I think the possibility of economic threat from China is really is helping to push things forward. But we've got to be aware of and I think Shankar alluded to them as well, the massive anti-competitive distortions through state-owned enterprises and other factors in India. And the fact that but I think the relationship has so much promise. I think Shankar just mentioned the figures about bilateral trade flows pretty much being steady for the last few years and not really growing, and about 16 billion or thereabouts in goods and 19 billion or so in services. And actually, there's been a decline in those exports rather than the growth between, I think it's slightly amended this up, but between 2012 and 2016, it was declining. But the areas that there's great promise for is for Britain's financial services, and I think India's tech sectors, but also where the EU has been pretty difficult with SPS, sanitary and phytosanitary bans. I think there'll be huge opportunities for India with Britain not actually placing those sort of restrictions upon them. Also, another huge area for the UK is going to be food and drink and education. And I think education is something that's very, very important, because as we're trying to get our higher education establishments to wean off their diet of China and Chinese students for a whole plethora of different reasons, Indian students, I think, have historically found the United Kingdom an attractive destination, and I think increasingly can. And of course, there's the reputational benefit on all sides of a free trade deal. For the UK, it's be a very, very significant signal to the world that we are again a major trading nation, but also for India, conducting a free trade deal with the UK, but also the clear benefits for their own growth and development. So, for example, if we have a good deal covering the financial sectors, the numbers of Indians that will benefit from the City of London and India's markets increasing needs for the sophisticated financial skills and services that London can offer. Now, I think, again, Shankar dealt with the issues relating to the asks from Britain, which makes this quite doable compared to the difficulties we've seen previously. But also, if we look at what needs to be done by India more than by the United Kingdom for one moment, in order to maximize the benefits of a trade deal for both parties, there's huge problems concerning, and this has been ever since 1947 and the inception of the Indian state, issues relating to property rights, rule of law, and the impact that has throughout. There's so many different problems that happen with those issues. And also the anti-market distortions and foreign investment problems. If India is able to effectively tackle with those in order to conclude and enhance a free trade agreement with the United Kingdom, it will only massively bolster and burnish India, its economy and economic growth, salaries and productivities. But for me, with my political hat on and my previous role before I got into Parliament, it's the geopolitical effects that really interest me and entertain me. And I think signing a trade deal with India would really help, not only with India's accession, as Shankar mentioned, to the CPTPP, but it will also not only aid in balancing or rebalancing, but it will help set, actually, for the next few decades, the balances in the Pacific region in the face of Chinese expansion. I think I will finish it there for questions because I have a tendency of going on.
No, don't worry, we'll come back to you for questions. Dinesh, maybe I can come to you next, particularly from your experience of being head of the India desk at the European Parliament. What are the obstacles? Imran mentioned, I think that there's been a hiatus in the EU-India talks, but they're trying to get them underway. What are these obstacles? Is there a prospect of removing them? And Shankar and Imran have both suggested that the UK might have a better chance of getting some enhanced partnership or free trade agreement with India compared to the EU. Is that your reading of it? And what was your experience of the barriers that we've faced to date, and how are we going to remove them?
Thank you, Mark. It's from what I saw, the EU-India deal there were two reasons why, the two main reasons why it was being stopped. And that was our reasons, Scotch whiskey and cars, which of course has been removed now. But as the speakers have said, things have changed a lot, especially with the rise of China. But I want to get into detail. Being a businessman, I know that for every £50,000 we export, we create one job. And COVID, as you know, has decimated the workforce. So if we create one job, and if India exports £50,000 worth, and by the way, they do to the whole of Europe, it was 125 billion euros. Half of it was from India and half of it was from Europe. So it wasn't that it was 90% one way and India was only exporting to. They will create 2+ jobs. The second point is that when you take away all tariff barriers, trade normally doubles. And there are many examples of other countries where this has happened. And if we've got, let's say, 24 billion pounds worth of trade at the moment, and you add another 20 billion, you are creating 400,000 jobs in this country. Now, I agree that it's not economics that we should look at, it's also politics and everything else, but voters do vote governments in and out. So protection, of course, of industries is important too. There are nascent companies that are set up by various countries, but politicians should work out the balance between protectionism and competition. And competition means a better and cheaper product for the consumers, who are obviously the voters. So there has to be a balance there. Now, what I noticed was, because I went to school in India and I have friends there, and both of my in-laws and my family live there in Delhi. The industry pressure groups on both sides, by the way, but I'm talking about India at the moment, sometimes have an information gap between relevant government ministries and departments and what they're thinking. It's not exactly, that both sides know what they're doing. So I know this, for example, in both the car industry in India and the alcohol industry, which means the cars and the Scotch whiskey, because I have friends who control a lot of these industries. So I just thought that this is very important. The jobs are very important. And I don't know if you've heard today in the FT, I saw that there's an infrastructure deal done between the EU and India to build not only in India, but across the world. Thank you.
Dinesh, thank you very much. Saeed, let me come to you for your thoughts. What do you see as the opportunities here, both for the UK and India, in having a better trading relationship? Perhaps not a full free trade agreement just at the moment, but some sort of partnership. And what do you think the obstacles are to that? Is this a pipe dream, or as the other panelists have suggested, is it something that is eminently achievable with goodwill on both sides?
Well, I think from our side, if you look at all the panelists, we are free traders, and we want as many trade deals as possible. And I think the opportunity is there geopolitically, as Shankar and others have said. Partly because, we've got a sort of the UK that's just left the EU. We want to sort of burnish, show people our free trade credentials. Liz Truss is doing an amazing job at signing deals as quickly as she can. But at the same time, India is also, as Shankar says, realigning itself, and particularly in its region, it's facing pressures from its neighbour China. I mean, for example, there have been the first deaths on the India-China border for more than 4 decades. Since then, it's escalated despite talks. And that's moving India away from the sort of non-alignment and actually talking up its alliances with Western countries. It's now part of the informal Quad with Australia, Japan, United States. At the same time, the British government post-Brexit has said it also wants to reorientate towards the Indo-Pacific region. So clearly there is a meeting of interest there. But we also have to be aware of some of the problems. As other speakers have said, the EU started trade talks in 2000, but actually suspended them in 2013. And the EU accused India of a lack of ambition. Now, I think as Dinesh said, there are probably faults on both sides. I think the other thing we've got to be clear about is that there are some pitfalls for the UK specifically, but for anyone wanting to deal with India. First of all, let's not forget the UK was India's former colonial ruler. We are probably, the 4 panelists are probably legacies of that or a result of that. And therefore, the UK has to avoid giving the impression of patronising India. This is very much a negotiation between equals, and in fact, India will overtake the UK economy in the next 2 or 3 years. There are also, I think, some doubts to India's commitment to trade agreements. If you look at the joint statement on the enhanced trade partnership between Liz Truss and her India counterpart, the phrase was a roadmap that would lead to a potential comprehensive FTA. Not exactly a firm commitment there, but it's better than nothing. I think what we'll end up seeing is little measures to improve market access without a comprehensive trade deal immediately. I also spoke recently to the head of an influential Indian think tank with links to the Indian government. And he outlined Modi's priorities for the second term. And one thing that was obvious was that trade wasn't mentioned there. And when I challenged him on that, I said, what about trade? He said, no, that's not going to be a priority for Modi's second term, possibly his third term. But don't forget as well that Modi launched in 2014 the Make in India initiative, where he wants to turn India into a global design and manufacturing hub. So while he would probably encourage foreign direct investment, to some of the issues we've seen on property rights that the other speakers have talked about, he's bound to prioritize domestic manufacturers over imported products. So I think, as free traders, we want it, but we've also got to be clear there are some concerns. Finally, in the UK, I think we also have to just assume it's not just the India that has internal problems to face. And another problem I should have explained is that India has a federal system. And therefore, some of the states, like Kerala has a Marxist government, for example, are quite strongly anti-trade. And there's also beyond the border issues where the trade negotiations at the table might agree something, but will the relevant government department and also agree that? These are what you call beyond the border issues. In the UK, we recently had a new trade bill passed through Parliament. And what was interesting was politicians on both sides asking for assurances on human rights with countries that the UK will trade with. Now, India has been accused of human rights violations in recent years, the Christians in Orissa. And of course, we've got in some constituencies, large Pakistani and Kashmiri diasporas. And no doubt they will make their voice heard when it comes to signing a deal with India. But overall, I think we want that deal. I'm not convinced there will be a comprehensive deal, but I think what we can do is we can tackle certain issues and get barriers removed on a case-by-case basis.
Thank you, Saeed. Shankar, let me come back to you. You mentioned in your opening remarks that there has been some liberalizations and reforms since the 90s, but the picture is somewhat patchy. And if anything, you could say that period of liberalization has been, happened 20 or so years ago and has sort of run into the ground. Could you specify there, Shankar, for our audience, what are the key things that India needs to reform domestically in order to make a free trade deal with the UK viable? What are the particular things? Are there laws or statutes that you can point to that need to be changed, altered, rescinded, or whatever? Or is it more of a kind of cultural way of behaving in terms of respect of property rights? And then could you also just give us your thoughts on, Saeed hit on this point, is India's federal structure a barrier to actually getting a deal over the line? That I think it's what, there's 28 separate regional governments or whatever. Does that mean that we're going to end up with whichever trade deal it was that was held up by the Walloon Parliament? You know, there'll be some element in India somewhere which will have an objection to this, another that has an objection to that, and the convoy will only move at the speed of the very slowest.
Yeah, so in terms of the particular issues and regulations and laws and so on that would need to be changed, or where there would need to be reform, I think there are certain signals that the Indian government could send that would help land us in a better position. Obviously, those are signals in the areas of property rights, competition, and open trade. So signals, for example, would be on property rights. You know, these cases that we mentioned in the report that are very negative signals about property rights protection. If India can correct those signals and send different signals, that obviously will be very important. Imran mentioned, you know, since 1947, there's been this history of expropriation and property rights, you know, not being, so the world is not convinced that the Indians are actually, you know, willing to protect property rights, and that's fundamental. Now, there is a benefit, or there is a reason for the Indians to do this, which is Modi's make in India policy and his desire for foreign investment to produce products produce goods in India. Well, no one's going to do that if the signal is negative. And on competition and open trade, certainly in open trade, what India does in the WTO is very important. I mean, India has historically been a big blocker in the WTO, along with Brazil and South Africa, which is ironic, and we mentioned this in the report, because the Indian interest and the Brazilian interest in WTO issues is radically different. Brazil is a major exporter of goods and sort of commodities at that. India is a major exporter of services and is very much in the high tech space. So you know, on a services negotiation, India, far from trying to block the plurilateral on services in the WTO, should actually be trying to advance it, because they want Mode 4 services from other countries. That would actually benefit India. So I think if India prosecuted its own interests a bit more in the WTO, rather than looking at things as a blocking tool, and I think sometimes the rhetoric in Geneva is not caught up with the reality in Delhi, where the government has moved, but the bureaucrats in Geneva have not moved. So that would be another sort of trade signal. And then eliminating agricultural reform, labor reform. Some of it we're seeing at the state level, which goes to your federal question. That's good, but we need to see more of it. And we need to see it being sort of really bedded down. And then, of course, from a UK ask perspective, you know, and it goes to what Saeed mentioned actually about maybe an early harvest or a down payment of certain things that you could do on the way to a comprehensive trade agreement. Opening up of India's legal services has been a long-standing irritant for 20 years plus, and actually it's the City of London and the law firms and the accountants and the financial services providers, all of that sort of constellation of actors, if they could have better access into the Indian market, which is good for India, because what you want to do in a trade agreement is it's not about, you know, a mercantilist, you know, I get my market access, you get your market access. They're really about building bigger markets. If you can build a bigger legal services market that can then benefit Indian companies, that's all good for Indian companies. So I think those are the kinds of things. And obviously on the whiskey point, yeah, I mean, I think that also would be a powerful signal, because that's a very powerful, you know, group in the UK, and it would be a signal of intention. I think that's where there is a deal to be done, because if you can say, and I had this conversation with senior Indian officials, you know, during the May administration, where I said to them, you know, if you can say, if the UK can deliver what you really need, which is Mode 4 and agricultural SBS openness, you know, let's imagine a world where we can do that. What is really on offer for the UK? And my sense of it is, if the UK can move in those directions, then some of these other things are on offer for the UK, and a deal, you know, a deal could be done.
Imran, let me come back to you. What do you think on the UK side of the ledger we need to, where do we need to show some give? You mentioned university admissions and the rest of it. As I mentioned in my Times article about India-UK relations earlier this week, China and India have about the same population size. I think actually India is likely to overtake China in 5 years' time. But in very rough and ready terms, there are 4 or 5 times as many Chinese students as Indian students at British universities. There's, that just one metric. What do you think on our side of the ledger, Imran? I mean, Shankar's mentioned the restrictions on agriculture, that the UK needs to say, we're going to give you access to all this, either your people or your goods. And do you think there is the political will and the appetite here in the UK to make those, I won't call them concessions, those liberalizations, those opening ups of our economy?
Well, I think, first of all, in free trade, we've got a government that believes in free trade, and it does improve the conditions of both parties. So, we don't need to start explaining that. That's a good starting point. But there's huge benefits, and this is why certain concessions have to be made by the British side, because by India enriching and getting stronger, we do. Shankar just mentioned the Make in India mission, with India positioning itself as the manufacturing hub of the world. And if they succeed in that policy, it will only increase, I think, our export opportunities. Already the UK's top export, I believe, to India is machinery. And so if they really do, if Make in India takes off, that's only going to increase those exports as demand increases as well. So we've got to see that big picture, encouraging India to take that path and fulfill the greatness that it could achieve is going to enrich and benefit us. But in order to do that, you're quite right. Whether it's student visas, which I think is absolutely in our interest, both in terms of simply being an alternative form of income for our universities from China, but also the soft power leverage it gets you, and the affection people have for their student days, and the links and contacts and networks that provides, the non-economic benefits of that cooperation and familiarity, as well as the clear economic benefits. But we are also going to have to, and I actually think these so-called offensive interests for India, these gives that we will give, are actually mutually beneficial. I think the textile and apparel tariffs, they should be, I can't see why it's against our interest to actually reduce them. It provides better quality goods at lower costs for British consumers. It helps increase wealth in India. They in turn can buy those goods that we want to sell. I want to sell them more Mulberry handbags and all the rest of it. And then, of course, in terms of agricultural SPS compliance, I really do believe that there is a huge, and not only in India, I think generally in free trade, we should be labeling and not restricting consumer choice. And we're going to have exactly the same conversations with, as we get to some more closer to conclusion of free trade agreements with whether it's the United States or others. So I think we should bite the bullet now, embrace free trade and the concepts of free trade. I think what we need to now have is a public awareness debate in the United Kingdom, that says to everybody, for goodness sake, don't be scared about it. The obverse side to all to risk is opportunity, and free trade and opening up to the world has far more opportunity than risks. And our people have better, cheaper goods and services, and will increase the wealth of other countries. And then, of course, all the concomitant concerns of people in constituencies like Wakefield, they do want us to be tougher on immigration and so on. But if our partners who believe in freedom are getting richer and wealthier, then we can buy their goods and services, they can buy ours, and there will be less of a pull for economic migration other than the people that we want, that we need, that we value, coming to help us in areas that we require that help. So all in all, the language of offensive interests and gives is not necessarily the language I'm comfortable with, because I prefer to couch it in the language of mutual advantage of actually opening up and reducing tariffs, reducing regulations wherever we can.
Dinesh, let me come back to you on your thoughts about what the UK needs to sort of put on the table. I mean, I'm very much with Imran here that I think there's, we should be looking at this as mutual advantage rather than give and take. There are gains, huge gains for more Indian students coming to our university. But what do we, and indeed the EU, and with your experience there, need to put on the table that they haven't yet done, both the UK and the EU?
Mark, I totally agree with Imran. Language is so important. Every nation is a proud nation. They don't like being talked down to, that we have more, we have better. You do not in that case. And the point is that everyone has a lot to give to each other. And it all depends on the spirit of entrepreneurship on both sides as to how they can grow the market in each vertical, in each industry. So I think that things should be done, we should be opening up. I saw a few questions or comments saying that there's a farmers' protest, or there's this protest or that. So I don't think a few people, I'm not saying the farmers are a few, I come from the Punjab, but there are a lot of good things that can happen. And for let's say 5 or 10% of the bad stuff, if we throw away the baby with the bathwater, the 90% of the good stuff, I don't think that's a good idea. There's another point that you mentioned, the Indian states. I think there are 35 or 37 rather than 28. And what we are really looking at here is that, like in the United States, it's the federal government that does a trade deal. So it's the Delhi government that does the trade deal. Whether the states want to increase taxes because they don't like it, like in Kerala, the government might not like it. They might increase taxes in their state, but they're the ones who are the losers. But people like Maharashtra, the North, UP, Punjab, Rajasthan, they'll all be doing good trade. And that's where all the businesses are, or the main businesses are. So don't worry about the Walloon effect or any other effect when it comes to trade deals.
Because just before I come to Saeed, I want to put a point to him, Dinesh, that if we don't need to worry about the federal structures or the local areas, they may make injurious policy decisions themselves, but that wouldn't necessarily scupper it. What do you make of the mindset of Prime Minister Modi? Saeed's anecdote there about trade's not really a top priority for me. Shankar's point about, is Modi pro-business, not quite the same as being pro-market. In fact, could be very different to being pro-market. If the Indian Prime Minister is lukewarm, even mildly negative about the opening up liberalizations, then this is all for the birds, isn't it?
Well, Shankar mentioned market and pro-business, pro-market and pro-business, but he didn't say what Modi was. He might have alluded to it, but he didn't say so. What's important here is that when you take a soundbite or a few sound bites and say trade is not an issue, I don't think so. I think if you turn around and say that there'll be 1 million jobs created because of a trade deal with the UK, if it goes up by 20 billion in trade, 1 million jobs is a lot. And you have to turn around and take the whole thing and not just take sound bites and say, he didn't mention this, so it's not important.
Mm-hmm. Saeed, let me come to you. I want to put to you a question we've had from Martin Ricketts, Professor Martin Ricketts, who's the chairman of the IEA's Academic Advisory Council. You always learn something when you get a question from Martin Ricketts. I didn't know this. He said the very term rent-seeking was introduced by Anne Kruger in the 1970s in the context of import licensing in India. Are interest group pressures in India sufficiently controllable now? Internally, has much changed to really make more liberal trade policies possible?
I think this comes to one of the challenges of any free trader faces when you're trying to explain the benefits of free trade. Look, I think all of us on this panel see the benefits of free trade. But what tends to happen is that you tend to get dispersed winners and concentrated losses. And when that happens, that lobby of concentrated losses can be quite loud. And so even the UK ourselves, when we left the EU, we started talking about the new UK global tariff. And whereas I think, in the EU, it's, I can't remember what it was, it's 66% of the stuff is tariff free. We were talking about maybe 90% of imports initially being tariff free. But when we came to announce it was a lower figure, still better than the EU, but lower than 90% we were talking about, because certain interests, the agricultural interests, the ceramic interests, had made their voices heard. And I think that all ties into the rent seeking as well. If you've got a strong lobby who've got good connections with politicians, or can dominate the media for a few days and say, look at all these jobs being lost as a result. You don't get the sort of hundreds of millions of winners who say, isn't it great that I'm getting cheaper services, or I'm getting more choice. Now, we have overcome that with other trade deals, but it's also a challenge. Before I move on, can I just make one point? I know we were talking about the language. The language that Shankar was referring to when he talked about offensive and defensive interests, that is the language that trade negotiators use when they're negotiating with each other and when they're trying to decide their position. They look at which markets they want to open up and which markets they want to try and protect as much as possible and try and game it what the other side are thinking. But we certainly shouldn't be using that language when we talk about the benefits of a trade with India. And I think what we've got to do is, as the other panelists have said, talk about the mutual benefits, about bringing India and the UK closer. Talk about our history, but in a positive way, but also talk about the fact that we have to use that soft power. I teach at a university, and I've taught. I went back to academia after 20 years out, and we made a real effort with Chinese students. But now that we've left the EU, what's interesting, opinion polls are showing that immigration is now less of an issue. And therefore, there is an opportunity now to show that we're open not just to people in Europe, one small part of the world, but the best talent from the world, from the whole world. And India is very much a part of that.
Shankar, can you give us your insight into the mind, the brain, and the sentiments of Prime Minister Modi? Should we look upon the Indian Prime Minister as a man who is an enthusiast for free trade, mildly in favour of it, or more likely a protectionist? Because that's clearly what's going to, at least in the immediate coming years, what's going to, the prospects of a deal are really going to hinge on that, right?
Yeah, I'm not sure I can give you an insight into Prime Minister Modi's thought process. I'm not sure anyone can really do that. But I will say that, again, sort of building on something that Dinesh said, they are pretty pragmatic, and if you can demonstrate growth and you can demonstrate success, then success will have its own sort of motive force in terms of making some of these happen. And I think, going to some of the things that Saeed raised, obviously offensive, defensive interest. This is trade negotiator language, but it is important because those of us who believe in free trade and believe in the mutuality of these liberalizations, and we don't like referring to trade liberalization as a concession given by one party in order to secure a concession given by another. That is all true, of course, but in order to get a deal done, and in order to make this real, sometimes you have to harness those mercantilist instincts. And the best example of this is Cordell Hull in the 1930s, who used the Reciprocal Tariffs Act to systematically create the GATT system, which essentially ratcheted down tariffs by leveraging the mercantilist impulses in goods trade of the members. The principal supplier of a product would negotiate with the principal consumer, they get a deal, and that was spread through MFN to everybody. And that's how you use the mercantilist impulse in a positive way. And I think to Martin Rickett's question, very good question about sort of political economy, when you can do that, when you can use those powerful economic forces to actually leverage a positive, from a free trader's perspective, a positive result, that's when trade deals tend to get concluded. And that's also when WTO rounds tend to get concluded. So it's one of the problems, I think, just broadening the conversation out to more of a sort of economic policy question. One of the problems nowadays is people seem to think they can bend economic forces to their own, to their own particular predilection. You can't do that. Economic forces are sort of fundamental, a bit like the forces of nature. What you need to do is harness them, and if you can harness them to a positive result, then you can get some of these positive effects, and that will lead to a deal. That will lead to a growth in the market. And finally, just on this point that I sort of neglected to cover in my opening statement about students, which is a very important point. Let's remember that when an Indian student comes to a UK university, that is an export of UK educational services. And we should be pursuing as much of that as we possibly can. Unfortunately, a lot of these services trade like that are not really reflected in the trade figures. But the UK loses out actually as a result of that, because we do a lot of that kind of thing. We do a lot of that sort of services provision, whether it's our universities or other UK services providers where people are coming from foreign countries to the UK to consume a service. That is a significant export, and it is underreported in the figures. The UK is a much bigger player actually in global trade because of that. And that's without even considering what Imran mentioned about when your educational institutions have educated half the world's leaders, then that does have a pretty significant effect on your soft power.
Yeah. I've got two questions I want to go around all of the panel on. Imran, I'll start with you. Emily Preston asks, I'm going to tie this to the question just beneath hers. It's been said that the UK-India trade deal will have a large impact on tech markets and services. Which are the other markets in particular that you believe will get a positive impact? That sort of ties in, and I know this is hard to put a number on it, but I'd like to hear all of our panelists' views on where do you think a deal with India ranks in terms of the UK's priorities for signing trade deals in general? I know Shankar has always spoken most eloquently about trade negotiations being like playing multi-dimensional chess, and you need to be doing a lot of things in sequence. You don't just focus on your arrangement with the EU and then move on to America. But in terms of the priority we should be placing on India, is it very high because the gains could be enormous, or is it not so high because we don't think it's going to be as easy to get over the line as CPTPP accession, for example? Imran, your thoughts on that?
I don't think it's going to be easy, but I think it's going to be incredibly important that we do it and we make this happen. Purely the politics and the geopolitics, as well as the economic benefits. I hope we begin to divest and ensure that we repatriate or place our supply chains in reliable, friendly, allied countries who believe in certain principles of our own, in the same way that Japan is encouraging its businesses to leave China and go to other places. I believe the United Kingdom needs to be doing that. And we've seen through the course of the COVID pandemic the importance of the security of supply chains. So for that reason alone, India is very important. And then you add to it its simple bulk, its growing heft, the potential of it being one of the few sovereign powers that can really, in the next century, take on and be a bulwark to China. It seems incredibly necessary that we have and beneficial, mutually beneficial, that we have as expansive and complete a set of relations with India as possible. And of course, one of the most important parts of any set of bilateral relations is our trading relationship, as well as security, intelligence, defense, and so on and so forth. So for all those reasons, I think it's crucially important. Further, to have, as we've mentioned, the various changes that India is going to have to make and will be encouraged to, and its increased wealth will actually help it. That's going to create a more stable, a better, more functioning India, one where we have the upward march of the middle classes taking more and more power and influence in a row, which in itself will, one hopes, steady the hand and regional conflicts We have in the area, let us not be shy of saying it, two regional powers, two nuclear powers who've had several wars in the past. On the other side of Pakistan, there's Iran with its clear desires for nuclear weapons. Having India being a great consumer of energy, and trade and so on, could well be and also be more aware of itself and more secure in itself, could be a great lever in order to help make the area more stable and more peaceful, and even help us in bringing Iran into the family of nations again. So for all those reasons, I place contracting a successful set of contracts and compacts with India being critically important.
Dinesh, what's your view on that? I know it's difficult to have an exact list of priorities, but give us a sense of how high a priority this should be.
I think I agree with Imran from the point of view that it's very important. I'm not sure as to which 1, 2, or 3, but I mean, if we're going to do deals, I think the United States is 1 and India should be 2. As far as going through the political shenanigans and what's going to happen, when and where and how we're going to do it, I don't think that should be mixed up with trade too much. Of course, there will be something. But I do want to make a point about doing a trade deal. It's the lobby groups in the country that one's trying to do a trade deal with. Does one know them? And can one get that intelligence, which is not a bad intelligence, not against the other country. It's intelligence from the point of view of actually what do they really want, so that we can, skew our demands, our asks in the right way. Mm-hmm. That's how a deal is done. And I'm not sure, it's our High Commission there and all that might be doing things, but they wouldn't be trusted as much as we've got so many other people who can do this. And I think those people should be used on both sides so that we get that deal and we get it fast. Time is money. Thank you.
Saeed, your thoughts on that, where it should be on the priority, but I want to wrap up by asking each of you, we've spoken a lot about the possible benefits and what needs to change in each market to get some deal over the line. But in addition, Saeed, to giving us some sense of how high a priority you think India should be in terms of our trade talks, I'm going to ask each of our panelists, starting with you, Saeed, about where do you think we're actually going to be? How optimistic are you feeling about it in, say, 2025? Will there be a comprehensive free trade agreement will have been signed by 2025, or would we have just made sort of, some modest incremental progress by then, and we'll have to keep at this for decades to come? How optimistic are you feeling about where we'll be in 4 years' time? Saeed?
I think to answer your last question first, I don't like to be a pessimist. I quite often like to be the optimist. But I think given the experience of the EU and given the language that's being used about the ambitions for down the line a more comprehensive deal, I think at the moment it's a lot of confidence building measures on both sides and tackling certain sectors on both sides, and sectors that what India's trade negotiators might see as offensive, and we might have seen as defensive. These are trade negotiator language. We should be opening up. I think, for example, Mode 4 is one that we could quite easily do, relatively easier, given the debate on immigration has almost been tamed as a result of the referendum now. I also sort of thought about some of Dinesh's points about talking to the lobby groups in each country. I was on a European Parliament International Trade Committee delegation in 2008 to India. We started talking to some of the civil society organizations. And what was interesting was a guy came up to introduce himself, and I think it was Stop FDI Now, Stop Foreign Direct Investment Now. So I said, all right, let's talk about that. Why are you against foreign direct investment? Your head. He said, well, actually, I'm not against foreign direct investment. I thought, well, hold on a minute. It's what it says on your card. He said, and then he started to explain the sort of nuances of where he had his concerns and didn't have his concerns. So I think Dinesh is absolutely right. As many of those conversations as possible, going beyond the banner that they have, I think is important. And can I just make one very quick point about multidimensional chess? I think in order of priority, this is not so much one game of multidimensional chess. It's almost like the chess grandmaster who plays a number of games simultaneously. And that's, I think, what Liz Truss is doing and the DIT are doing. And some balls you stop quickly, some you take a long time to consider your next move. That's what I think it is.
Dinesh, I know you need to run, so very quickly, perhaps I can come to you on where do you think we'll actually get to for all of the wonders and the opportunities here? Where do you think we'll actually get to, Dinesh, by 2025?
Thank you, Mark. I think it's going to be an enhanced trade partnership. That's what the term's being used, onto a full trade deal. Whatever in incremental steps is good. We don't want to build a Rolls Royce. When I was in the internet business, we were changing the wheels of a car while it was running. So we learn, we build, and we learn again. And so, but we need to engage. Thank you.
Dinesh, thank you very much for joining us. If you have to run, please do. It's been a delight hosting you. Thank you. Imran, what's your take on it? We've spoken about all of the huge gains that could be made, but are you an optimist that'll happen? Do you think it will be incremental, like Dinesh has said, and we're going to have to keep changing the wheels while we're in motion? Or can we look only a few years away to some sort of comprehensive document and agreement being reached?
I'm an optimist in that I know it will happen one day. I think I'm a realist in saying I think the view is right. It's going to be an incremental approach, and probably by 2024-5 we'll have not a free trade agreement in the way you're talking, a fully functioning one, but probably by 2030, if we have another conservative government in place, I think we're working towards that. But it's going to be gradual. But I think every step, I think it's going to be solid footings, and each and every one is going to be beneficial and enrich both parties. And as has been mentioned before, it's simply about building up relationships and confidence and trust in order to get to that point. So I see it all as being incredibly positive. So I remain optimistic, but realistic in terms of it's not going to be done overnight.
Shankar, let me finish with you. I'd rather arbitrarily just ask where we'll be in 2025, but are you on the optimistic or the pessimistic end? Will it be incremental, or is a free trade agreement within our reach, if not now, within a few years? Where do you think we'll actually get to rather than where you hope we'll get to?
Yeah, I think based on your first question was really about the multidimensional chess. I mean, it's impossible to answer that without sort of saying that it's not only a multidimensional chess game, it's also a dynamic game with very strong interaction effects between the different boards that you're playing on. And therefore it's obviously very complex, but certainly I think DIT has been playing a good job of reading across in those other agreements how they will work. Sometimes simply negotiating something with someone has an effect on the rest of your negotiations, and indeed on other negotiations that other people are having with other parties as well. So I suspect that what we'll be doing by 2025, I would think that there is at least a very strong possibility that the UK will by then have concluded its accession process with the CPTPP, where I would hope that we would have a US deal. I think it's not impossible that the US would then be back in the CPTPP by 2025. Taiwan will almost certainly be negotiated. There was huge pressure to get Taiwan into the CPTPP for obvious China-related reasons, and also for semiconductor-related reasons. And then the other countries, Indonesia, Thailand, Korea. So you could be looking at a CPTPP, which India is, I don't think it will have exceeded by 2025, even in the best case scenario, but I think it could be in the accession process by 2025. So you're looking at a CPTPP enhanced version of about 60% or more of the global economy. That will sufficiently challenge the WTO. I don't suspect that the WTO will make much progress, unfortunately, in the next 5 years. I'm not very optimistic about the WTO's ability to really do much of anything, but certainly that if it is challenged in this plurilateral way by things like CPTPP, you're almost in a Tokyo moment, which is the Tokyo round in the 1970s, where you had a lot of plurilateral agreements that then galvanized the WTO and ultimately led to the Uruguay round. So, which was the biggest concluded negotiation covering multiple areas. So hopefully that is where that may go. And then in terms of the UK-India FTA, I certainly think by then we should have at least been able to get a down payment on a comprehensive trade agreement. And I would certainly argue that that's what we want to do with some signals. A lot of trade negotiation is about signaling to other partners around the world and signaling the areas where we can do a deal, scoping what the deal ultimately might look like, particularly in areas where everyone knows that you're not playing a card. Right, so that it isn't a big battle that has to be left to the end of the negotiation. Everyone knows you're going to do a deal on that particular area. Why not pocket the gain now? Why not do the down payment now? And that's essentially what I think. That's where I think we will be with India, and all of that taken together. And of course, I think also a US-UK deal will have been done by then. Hopefully, we'll all be in the CPTPP together as was originally envisaged. All of that taken together, I think, will have a profound effect on China. Now, what we don't know and what we cannot know is whether the Chinese will react to that by moving more into the sort of reform-oriented world they were certainly in the period between, let's say, 2001 and 2007. When they just acceded to the WTO, and I think the forces in favor of a market-based approach were, if not in the ascendancy, were certainly of equal weight to the planning, the planners, the central planners in the Chinese administration. That has changed, obviously, and it may well be, and certainly if you talk to Bob Lighthizer, his view would be they'll never change. We just simply need to learn to coexist with them in a sort of constrained Cold War almost kind of mentality. I don't know the answer to that. No one can know the answer to that. But what we do know is that if we ratchet up the pressure in these ways, the possibility of China moving in a slightly more market-friendly direction is obviously much higher. And if they did, I think that would have a profound effect on the world. So I think that's where I think we will be in 2025, unless some other event like COVID or something comes to warn us. But the bottom line with this is there are things that you can control, and you should try to control those. And there are things that you cannot control, and you should not be dissuaded from controlling the things you can control by the big uncertainty. And it's a pity Dinesh has had to leave us, because entrepreneurs, and he founded a big entrepreneurial company, entrepreneurs know this. This is how they operate. And we in the government, we in the UK, and Imran and his colleagues need to be much more entrepreneurial in our approach. Control the things you can control and live with uncertainty, flexibility, and adaptability.
Shankar, on that pro-enterprise note, we've overrun our time, but gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Imran, Saeed, Dinesh has had to leave us. Shankar, thank you all for contributing to a fascinating conversation, and one I'm sure the IEA and others will be returning to many times between now and 2025 and beyond. And Shankar, thank you very much for your excellent paper, which the Institute is proud to have produced today. You can find that paper just by going to our website, iea.org.uk. Thanks all for watching, both on the Zoom side of the channel, of the chat, and on the YouTube side of the chat. If you've enjoyed watching us on YouTube, please hit the thumbs up. If you're not yet a subscriber to the IEA London YouTube channel, please come on by hitting subscribe and the notification bell. Just a quick advert for two upcoming events. At 5 p.m. This afternoon, we'll be premiering our next episode of The Swift Half with Snowden, a 30-minute discussion between the IEA's head of lifestyle economics, Christopher Snowden, and his guest, which this week is Sam Bowman, senior fellow at the Adam Smith Institute. At 6 p.m. this coming Monday, start of next week, I'll be chairing the next in our series of In Conversation discussions. My guest will be the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, the Right Honourable Steve Barclay MP. Please join us for that as well. More details you can find on our website or on our YouTube page. Thanks again, gentlemen. Thanks all of you for listening. Enjoy the rest of your day. Over and out.